hopefully that.
Okay.
There we go. We're good to go. Thank you, Jennifer, for
Good
reminding me.
deal.
And the only other question I want to ask of you, Jen, and I should have done so beforehand,
Mhm.
in terms of questions, would you like folks to be able to ask on the fly? Would you like me to monitor the chat, hold to the end? What works best for you?
The chat window I hate. So if you can monitor that, that would be great, because it's just too much going on. But people can either one. It's totally informal, so they can, you know, go ask questions as we go along or save them for the end. I'm not picky about that.
Sounds good. Thank you. Then I will monitor the chat. And like I said, over to you, and thanks.
All righty. All right. So let me share my screen here, and hopefully everybody can see it. Okay.
Can definitely see it on this end.
Excellent. All right, so I am going to start off by doing a quick winter recap, and then I'll go into the spring management, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about swarming and honey and honeycomb production. But if we don't, that's fine. I'll talk all night about bees. It's all up to you, and if you want to cut me off. But let me just go ahead and jump in. All right, so population size, mites, virus loads, moisture buildup, and honey stores, supplemental feed are going to be your biggest winter issues. Colonies should have been built up well or combined in the fall. So there's really nothing you can do about that now. All of that should have been taken care of beforehand. Mite treatments, oxalic acid or HopGuard, can be done right now. They're not temperature dependent. So those are good treatments to use to try to stay ahead of the mite curve there. And quilt boxes and mountain camp method for feeding can be good to absorb moisture. And I'll go over a little bit more about the mountain camp method of feeding, I think, in the next screen. And insulation. Top insulation is proven to be more beneficial than wrapping hives, because when the condensation moisture rises to the top of the hive, it hits the inner cover, cold surfaces, roof, and then forms that condensation and then drips back down on them. So that's why quilt boxes are really great, because they, you know, absorb that moisture. If your hives are in a really windy prone area, then you could wrap the hives. Just don't go crazy, you know, don't wrap the front. You could, if you have a screen bottom board that's closed, you could open up that a little bit so they're getting some kind of airflow. But hay bales are good too as a windbreaker there. All right, so the supplements, this is going to be really, really important. It's important all the time, but it's going to be really important from here on out. Warm winters may cause more activity and brood rearing, and so that is not a bad thing. Warm winters are not a bad thing. They don't get confused, you know, with up and down temperatures. It's actually more beneficial for them, so they can have their cleansing flights. So if they're having issues with nosema or anything like that, then they can hopefully flush that out of their system. Increased activity is going to cause them to eat more honey though, and eat more supplements. So this is why on these days that it is, you know, 50 degrees or warmer, that we can take a peek in there and see if they need more supplements. Lift up on the hive. That's a good way to tell. If the hive is light, then that means they've probably eaten all their honey stores, and they definitely need their winter supplements. If they're running low on honey, you want to feed the supplements. I go ahead in November, I start winter supplements, giving them fondant and the dry sugar, the mountain camp method of feeding, and that's in addition to their honey. So I find that they eat the fondant first, then the sugar, and then they usually save their honey for last, because they're true honey hoarders. And that's fine, because then that means in March, then hopefully they'll still have some honey left. But again, I'm throwing food on them all winter long. Winter supplements, just to go over those real quick. If you're not familiar, we have fondant, and that's not like Wilton's cake fondant, so it doesn't have any cornstarch added to it. It's just 90-10 fondant, so it's 90% sugar, 10% corn syrup, and that's just to help keep it pliable and not dry out. And you can put that in a like a little quart bag so it doesn't dry out, because if it dries out, they don't really like it as much. They like it to be a little bit moist. And then you have your sugar bricks, sugar cakes, or called winter patties. And sugar bricks and sugar cakes, a lot of people make them, by adding sugar, water. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. Sugar slurry, this can be a really great emergency feed, and it's just water and dry sugar, regular cane sugar, and you just make it like a slushy form. And you can like actually smush this into the comb. So like it has to be 50 degrees or higher, so you can actually open up the hive, pull brood, look at the comb, and smush it into the comb there. But it's really great because these winter supplements that go up at the top of the hive, whether it's candy boards, sugar bricks, fondant, bees will not break cluster to go get these supplements or go get their honey. And like if there's honey that is 1 or 2 frames over and the cluster is not near it, they will not break cluster to go eat it. So they will starve just right in the position where they are. So these winter supplements that are up at the top are useless to them while they're in cluster. These supplements are only good when it's these warm days that they can break cluster and go get it. But the sugar slurry, you can actually mush it into the comb, put it down in the hive where they're going to cluster. The dry sugar, the mountain camp method of feeding, and this is what I like to use in addition to the fondant, and it's just dry sugar. And a lot of places on the internet will say to use a newspaper, but the newspaper just turns to mush and really doesn't hold the sugar up well. So either a corrugated sign, like a political sign, or cardboard would be better than the newspaper. And I put about 4 or 5 pounds of sugar in there. This one looks like it has a little bit more, probably went crazy. And then it also absorbs moisture in the hive too. And so you can come back in there and kind of like break it up, and it'll just keep absorbing the moisture. So January to February tasks, you want to remove the snow and dead bees from the entrance, because this is generally when we start getting or blizzards and whatnot. And upper entrance stems can be helpful because it's going to help with airflow, but it also might provide an exit for them too. Now, if the hives are right near your house, then you can, access them hopefully rather easily to remove snow. But if your hives are an hour away from you and the snow's too much, then upper entrance stems can be helpful so they don't suffocate from the snow being at the entrance. Hopefully the snow doesn't get that high. If it gets that high, then, well, we've all got problems. Brood buildup begins again. And so, our days are getting longer. The plants are going to start blooming and budding. And so this is the brood production starts kicking in. And so we want to give them pollen supplements to help encourage that, because a lot of times the weather just isn't good enough for them to go out and get what might be blooming. Mid-February is generally when willow, oaks, and maples produce pollen and some small nectar flows. But again, weather has to be good. If you get a warm day, 50 degrees or more, you want to do a quick brood inspection just to see where we're at, what's going on. Are they, having a little bit of brood happening there? January, February is a good time for oxalic acid or hop guard, again, to kill the phoretic mites, because anytime there's brood production, there's going to be mite production. And this is a time you want to think about ordering bees, either as a backup or maybe if your hives have already died out. Generally, there's no shortage of places to order bees. Everybody's selling bees, nukes, packages. If you have a favorite supplier, they might sell out. So you just want to get on that list and get your orders in. You want to inventory your equipment, are your boxes cruddy, getting old, and then you want to continue your education, what you're doing right now, and then strategize about next season and what's your plan. So common causes of winter losses are poor early fall buildup, poor nutrition due to nectar dearth and lack of supplements, poor vitellogenin stores, and mites could have sucked that out and ruined that too. Lack of honey stores and/or winter supplements, heavy mite loads or viruses. And remember, it's not the mites that kill the bees, it's the viruses. But there could be arguments made against that. Nosema, tracheomites, they're still around and kicking. You can't see them, you know, they're microscopic mites, but they still affect bees. Prolonged cold periods or extreme temps, if we get these cold snaps, sometimes, you know, that could be the final straw for them, especially if they have a small cluster. If they have a large cluster, generally they can withstand cold temps pretty well. Snow-covered entrances and poor ventilation, again, they can suffocate if you don't clear that entrance out for them. Snow can be a good insulator though, but just not so it's totally covering it. But if it has some dead space in between the snow and the hive, that can actually be an insulator. And moisture buildup, that can just be a killer. Bees can withstand cold very well, but they cannot be cold and wet. So this is what a small little dinky dead out looks like. It just did not have enough bees to keep it alive. And as you can see, there's honey that's right near it. But they're not gonna like 1, 2, 3 move over and start eating it. And then the mold came in later, you know, from the moisture. The mold didn't kill them. They were already done for before the mold happened. And this is another dead out where I don't see a lot of honey in these cells, so that could have been a factor too, but of course we're not seeing the rest of the frames here. But it looks like it was a small cluster as well. Now this is a classic moisture dead out problem right here. They're just wet and nasty. All right, so I'm going to now jump into spring management. Does anybody have any questions about winter before I move into spring? No? Okay, well, if you think about it, and I'm available anytime for questions. If you think about something later, you know, email, walk in, phone, I'm available. All right, so now I'm going to jump into spring. Usually I kind of half march into winter, but this time I'm just sticking it all in spring. But really our Marches have been more like winter lately. And I think our Aprils have been more like Marches. It's like we've been a month off. But anyway, March is a very, very scary, unpredictable month for bees. A lot of hives die of starvation and are cold at this point. Numbers die off and dwindle if they're not having any new babies born, new generations coming up, which they might have a little bit, but it might not be enough to really help the cluster out very much. And of course, you know, if there was brood production, then they're going to eat the honey. And so they can die out very, very quickly. They can die out within a matter of days if they do not have food. So this is, again, where sugar slurry comes in great as an emergency feed. And again, you can just mush it right into the cells. Now, you don't want to put it where brood is, empty cells. That's the only places, you know, you want to smush that into. But it's going to be great because it's down in the hive close to the cluster. And brood production has increased. However, the weather is not usually conducive for foraging. And by this time, they've used all their honey and food supplies. And add winter supplements if necessary. Again, it's a cheap insurance policy. I would add it anyway, even if they have honey, just put it in there. Keep pollen supplements on the hives for brood production, because again, they need that pollen to feed to the babies, or that protein rather. And again, you know, there's lots of things that are probably blooming, but the weather has to be warm enough for them to go out and get it. The next steps are going to depend on above freezing temps. And so if we're in the clear and our nighttime temps are like steady in the 50s, then you can remove your inner covers, quilt boxes, and install your feeders and start the sugar 1-to-1 sugar water feeding, and just give them a gallon at first and see if they take it. And if they do, then you can ramp up, you know, and give them more. And this is going to help stimulate their brood production. Depending on the weather and nectar flows, then you can remove the feeders, add the supers and excluders towards the end of March. But it's all depends on the weather. And sometimes we only get to feed like a week, and then we start jumping into autumn olive and mustard and willows and all of that. You just have to really keep your eye on the weather and just be really in touch with what's blooming at that time. And it just go out, walk around, see what's going on. And I don't you just have to get out and see what's out there blooming. Generally the mid-Atlantic, all of our foraging is the same, but different places have more, maybe tulip poplar or more locust or some other type of plant. But you have to become very familiar what's growing and the bloom times for them. Place the queen excluders. If you choose to use the queen excluders, I personally, I love them. I think they're great. I want honey in my honey supers. I don't want brood. I know some people call them bee excluders, but if you put them on right and in time, way in advance, there's usually not any problems. You never want to have drawn super on when you're feeding in the spring, because of course they're going to store the sugar water in there and then it's funny honey. And it's not a big tragedy, just if that happens, just mark the frame that was sugar water, so you don't accidentally end up extracting that. You could feed that back to them. It's okay to have a feeder on if you're trying to get drawn comb though, and you want to place those supers underneath the feeder. And usually by the end of March, the beginning of April, we have 2 supers on. And it really depends on the season, the strength of the hive. If we go to 3, generally it's not more than 3. Hopefully I'll have time to talk more about honey production. But generally that's it, just 2 supers. It ain't like it used to be. Foraging and the bees, it's just, you're lucky if you're gonna get 2 during a bloom time. If you want to keep them on all season long, that's fine, but then you're not going to get your special, varietal honey. It'll just be wildflower at that point, and that's fine too. But I like to try to separate my honeys. So March, this says or am I still in March? Yes. Place the top screen on top of honey supers. There's still a lot of people that aren't really familiar with top screens. Inner covers are used in the fall and winter, and then top screens are used in the spring and summer. And the bees don't have to work as hard regulating temps, and because it can be, they've got a lot of jobs to do. And so when they have to cool the hive, if the temps get too high, then they have to go get water. And this might not be an issue really in spring, but it's definitely more an issue in summer. Then they have to go get water, bring it back to the hive, and then spew it to bring down the temps. And if they don't have to go do that, then they can do another job, like maybe go get you honey, nectar. Yeah. Honey cures faster, and it's less work for the bees to fan and evaporate the water from the nectar. So again, they can go do another job. Comb replacement schedule or obtain drawn comb. You always want to be on a comb replacement schedule. So and spring is the best time to get drawn comb. So there should be a minimum of 3 deep frames of brood or 5 medium frames before placing any foundation or drawn comb supers at this time, because there's just not enough bees. They have to take care of the babies, they're cleaning house. And so then it's like, oh great, now I have to draw out all these supers now too. So it's really taxing and stressful for them to make wax. And they say it takes like 7 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. So you would be stressing them. And so if there's less than that, you're gonna have to wait for more brood buildup. Add brood to it if you can, if you have other hives. Or you might have to requeen if she is turning out to be a dud and running out of juice. If you place foundation on too early, then they can rob the wax to cap the brood. And carniolans are famous for doing that. They're very efficient. Italians are usually great wax producers, so they love making wax. But Kearney's, they'll just like, I'm not making this. I'm just gonna steal this, and then your wax looks like Swiss cheese. And generally, uh-huh.
Let me ask you a quick question. What would you offer up as some warning signs that your queen is turning into a dud?
Well, spotty brood, that's always the first indicator there. And she's just not, but again, I think spotty brood is probably the best one, because everything else is timing, like the time of year. And are they bringing in nectar? Then the ages of the bees are really important too. But it's mostly a food issue most of the time, because if they start cannibalizing brood, but like in the fall, I think that's what they do a lot. You know, they start cannibalizing brood because they know winter's coming. So it's not necessarily a queen problem or issue, it's just the timing of year. But in the spring, she should be rocking and rolling. And because they're bringing in, you know, hopefully if the weather's right and everything, she should really be building up really well, solid patterns and all of that. But if she's not, then, and I think I might talk about this or maybe this in the next screen. I don't know.
Gotcha.
Sometimes I can talk about it. But yeah, they usually never go back and fix that foundation after they've made it to Swiss cheese. So in April, by the 1st of April, dandelions are usually everywhere. So usually by this month, March is more or less like a monitoring period, but that can be really hard because of the weather. And like I said, our months are off, but if things are popping and blooming and the weather's good, then that's in the spring, everything is unicorns and rainbows. If you are still trying to draw calm, continue to feed for another week or so. But generally around April 15th, that's when you're going to stop feeding. Again, it just depends upon the weather. Like I said, these past springs have just been awful. Usually apples bloom around April 15th, and it's still been pretty cold. And so we haven't really been able to get a great apple harvest. It's just been a very, you know, small, piddly amount, enough for my private stash anyway. But if hives haven't populated by this point, there is a problem. And you want to give the queen until mid-April to prove herself and requeen if necessary. You don't want to miss nectar flows because of a failing queen. You really, so as the season goes on in spring and it gets warmer and better and more things blooming, your hive is going to grow and grow and grow. And everything kind of like builds up with these nectar flows. And so, you know, our early flows are the mustard and the autumn olive, and then the willows, and then like everything kind of, this is the mid-Atlantic anyway. Everything kind of builds up for the locust, and then it's all downhill from there. And then you'll see your colony expand for the locust, and then start going down.
Hey, Jen, a quick question from the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a cheat sheet with these dates?
No, because it's not so much about the dates, it's more about the weather. These are just very general times, and it's definitely more weather dependent than anything. But as you become more familiar with beekeeping and things that grow in your area, and there's lots of lists out there about what grows where and generally the times of years, or you know, time of year, then you'll get a feel for, okay, here comes a good period, you know. But if the weather's bad, then it doesn't matter. You know, we've had locust blooms happen, and then hail comes, knocks them off. So it's nothing's really written in stone.
I don't want to stop train of thought, but another question from the chat. When do you get queens to sell?
Generally the beginning of April.
Thank you.
And then we stopped selling them like the end of August because the queen acceptance gets really poor at that point. All right, so some hives are going to have enough brood to start a nuke if that's what you want to do. If you pull brood too soon, though, it can affect your honey crop. It's a fine balance between brood manipulation, equalization, and keeping them from swarming, and then affecting your honey flow. So you want to think as your colony kind of like a factory. And so you need all of those workers on this assembly line to do all these jobs. And if you pull some of these, workers away, then that could affect your honey crop. But you do need to do that to prevent swarming. And we'll talk more about that soon. Swarm prevention, sometimes only one frame or two is needed to pull for nukes or give to a weaker hive. And that's always my first thing to do, is rob from the rich and give to the poor, and do hive equalization, make everybody, on the same even level there. And then once that's good, then I can start making new hives. It's like, take care of what I got before I start making new stuff. And be cautious of nighttime temps, though, because of chill brood and frozen bees. So you don't want to make nukes and splits, and not have enough bees to cover that brood. My dad always said, if you can plant tomatoes, you can make nukes. So some years it's been a mess. Our maize have been nasty. So for packages, if you have or can get a deep frame of brood covered in nurse bees, this is greatly going to help your package development, in addition to drawing comb. So that's a great hurdle right there for them. If if you've already have that, then that's less work that they have to do. Drawing comb is a very precious commodity, and if you in your group, maybe you can get that from another beekeeper. It depends. People ask me all the time for drawing comb, and I wouldn't have any left if I did do that. But brood frames, I've noticed over the past 2 years, a lot of people making their own nukes to sell, which is fantastic. And so I think now that there's more brood available to go around for people, but you're supposed to get your hive inspected before you sell any comb, any brood. But I know there's always people looking for a brood as well. But if you've got a package, and if you give it brood, either from your hives or you buy it, that's really going to boost them. And if you add another deep frame, you might possibly get a honey harvest, but don't count your chickens before they're hatched there because of weather. But anything that you can do to help them with that would be great. So in May, by the 1st of May, your hive should be busting. And major brood buildup should result in 4, 5, or 6 deep frames of brood. Again, if you're not seeing this, and the weather has been right, you see nectar, coming in, and pollen. Maybe it's the queen, especially if she, just has spotty brood, she's just not up to par. But by this, we're on swarm. Actually, a lot of times in April, hives are starting to swarm. Be alert for swarm prevention and control, and you should be inspecting your hive every 7 days. And that's to stay ahead of the 8th day, and that's when the queen cell gets capped, if they make queen cells to swarm, so we can try to stay ahead on what they're planning. Because once that queen cell gets capped, they can leave, they can swarm. And you can push it out to 7 to 10 days outside of a major nectar flow. But generally, you even in the summer, you don't want to go longer than 10 days. I know there's a lot of schools of thought out there that are like, if you inspect every week, you're stressing them out, and this and that and the other. But hives can go downhill very, very quickly. And if we're not here to look and see and intervene, it can be really hard to turn them around, especially if they go queenless. I have people come in and want to get queens, and we start talking, and then I ask them, like their queen lessons, like, when's the last time you were in a hive? And they're like, oh, I don't know, about a month ago. Ugh, this might not work now, because of laying workers. So we need to stay on top of them more. Do not let your hive swarm, because you're going to lose your honey harvest. They're going to take all your honey, mostly, and probably about 80% of your workforce as well. They're going to knock you back down to a nuke level. You do not want that. It's excellent time for comb replacement schedule. Once they start drawing out that really pretty wax or white wax, and you might start to see it burr combing in spots, they're itching to draw out comb. So this is a really good time to give them new stuff to draw out. Nukes in packages might stop taking sugar water towards the mid or late May. Again, depends on the weather, depends on what's blooming. But usually, packages and nukes, especially packages, you're going to have to feed them. They require more maintenance because they're mostly nurse bees. They don't have a foraging force. Nukes, theoretically, you shouldn't have to feed them because they have all ages of bees. But again, it depends on the weather. And so you might have to give them a boost here and there. This means they're bringing in enough nectar and they don't need the sugar water anymore. And our honey extraction sometimes starts in mid-May. It's been more like June, really, to ensure that we get specialized honey. Apple, just small harvests we've gotten lately, but then the black locust, which is good usually. And tulip poplar can be challenging some years, because it can overlap locust, and then thistle, clover. But again, I try to keep my blooms and honey separate. That's just me. If you want to keep them on, from April to, I wouldn't say August, because August you're really pushing it for mite treatments and sugar water feeding. But usually the middle of July, you want your honey supers off. So things to consider about mite treatments and which ones to choose for your spring treatments. You want to think about the timing for your honey supers. If you're going to use Apiavar, that's a 45-day application there. And so you cannot have honey supers on when you use Apiavar. Oxalic acid, you can have honey supers on. Mite Away or Formic Pro, you can have it. I believe maybe HopGuard. ApiaGuard, I don't think you're supposed to have it on. And the temperature, because a lot of these medications are temperature dependent. And so is the weather going to be good enough for them to be able to go into their gas form that they need to do? So like Formic and ApiaGuard work on gaseous levels there. Colony strength and health. A lot of times when they're coming out of winter, they're still really stressed and fragile, and if you give them a nuclear treatment like Formic, I think that's probably one of the harshest treatments. They might not be able to withstand it very well. So you do want to have like a more populated colony to be able to withstand Formic. Excuse me. And any possible side effects from the medications. A lot of these have the potential for bad side effects. Is Formic, queen loss, absconding. And so is that going to disrupt, population buildup, honey flows, etc. So you want to think ahead a little bit, but you have to be flexible because we're all, the bees and us are at the mercy of weather. So you always have to be flexible. So common spring problems, European foul brood, it's bacterial. It's not quite as bad as American foul brood, which is spore forming. European foul brood, it's not spore forming. And you can, you got it when your larva starts looking like yellow, mushy, or rubbery. There's two types. Well, there's they're it's not a different type, but it has a different symptom. It's an atypical European foul brood that happens in the fall. And it's probably most likely because of mites. And so you'll have snotty brood in the fall. But in the spring, the larva is rubbery and it can have a twisted like stomach ache position. Your larva should always be white, glistening in a C shape. And if it's anything other than that, that could be a problem. And so European foul brood, it's common. It's not a bad thing. It's not quite as persistent, as American foul brood, because again, it's not spore forming, so it doesn't really like hang out in your combs for 80 years. But it's not anything to be like, to feel dirty about, or it happens. Nosema apis, and that's a microsporidian fungal parasite, and it usually happens in bees, that it sets up shop in their gut, and usually bees that are confined for long periods of time, it affects them. And so definitely bees coming out of winter and can this happen to. And it's microscopic. You can't see, this, and it generally doesn't have any symptoms. Its ugly cousin, Nosema ceranae, usually no symptoms. A lot of people say dysentery is a symptom of it. It might not be. It might be from poor nutrition or something else, or so it's not always a symptom. The only way that you can identify 100% nosema, either ceranae or apis, is under a microscope, and they're very hard to tell the difference between the two, and they have to go off for PCR DNA analysis. Chalk brood, it's a fungal disease, and it makes the larva look like little petrified mummies. And they pluck them out usually, and just they fall down to the bottom. All of these are considered stressor diseases, especially European foul brood and chalk brood or stressor. And it's usually because there's a severe age imbalance that's happening, because we don't have a lot of nurse bees yet that clean house to do all that. And then also we don't have good nutrition always coming into the colony. So that's why if you can give them supplements, that can help. So they usually clear themselves up without any problem. European foul brood, if you want to get a prescription for the terramycin, you have to do that through a vet now. But again, it usually clears itself up. Nosema is treatable with the Fumagel. They don't make the Fumagelin anymore. And chalk brood, Apiagard says that it helps with that because of the thymol, but I don't think there's a lot of evidence about that. A lot of the internets and textbooks and things will say to requeen. I don't think it's the queen's fault that this is happening. So especially if you have a really good productive queen, I think you just need to cage her for a week or so and let the population catch up and clean house and do the things that they got to do. Like I said, this isn't the queen's fault that this is happening. However, if you don't have bees that are bred for the varroa sensitive hygiene or very hygienic bees, that might be an issue, and you might want to swap her out for a more hygienic queen. All right, swarm management. So what is swarming? Swarming is a natural, innate instinct and method of reproduction and survival. Bees want to do two things. They want to reproduce and get food to reproduce. That's all they want to do in this world. They don't care about pollination, any of that. So we're trying to fight their natural instinct of leaving. Swarming usually means the colony is thriving and so highly populated that they have outgrown their current home. Swarming is usually good for the bees, but not good for the beekeeper. Not good for the beekeeper because bees make a new queen, which stays behind with a small amount of bees, and the majority of the hive leaves with the old queen and the honey. So it opens up the door for queen issues. It rocks the boat on everything, and can disrupt and decrease your honey production. And depending on the time of year swarming occurs, it can be detrimental to the parent colony and the swarming colony if they don't find a suitable home. So if they swarm in September, which is totally possible, then there's not enough time for them to reproduce and catch up to go into winter. And for that swarming colony, if they don't find a nice toasty home somewhere, then they might not be able to survive the winter either. So causes of swarming: overcrowding in the brood nest. There's not enough room for the queen to lay due to cells being used for brood and/or cells filled with honey, nectar, or pollen in the brood nest. Too many workers in the brood nest. Nurse bees get ticked off, like, get out of here. I'm trying to work, I'm trying to feed the babies. Not enough nice drawn comb for the queen to lay on. So if it can be really challenging starting out if you just have a bunch of foundation, not a lot of drawn comb. Plastic can be more of a challenge a lot of the times for them to draw out, and they might get into a swarm mode. And especially in the spring, that's their time. That's their time to reproduce, time to shine, time to swarm. And I've seen it with packages sometimes. Like if they don't have a lot of drawn comb, they'll start building swarm cells. And it's like, what are you doing? You've got a whole box here to do. And they're just like, that's it. We gotta get out of here. Loss of queen pheromone. Older queens have less queen substance. Queen substance helps keep the colony functioning, working, business as usual. And the older the queen gets, the more she loses that. So a large hive with a reduced pheromone can equal swarm preparation because she just doesn't have that scent to permeate throughout the colony. So the bees on the outside are like, I don't smell her anymore. What happened? I guess I need to make a swarm cell. And so once they start making swarm cells, they just get into that mode, and it can be really hard to break them of it. That's why it's important to use young queens. The hive is going to be less likely to swarm. And it's not the queen that's controlling any of this, it's the workers. Overheating, again, this is what textbooks will say. It's possible, but not likely, especially if you're using bottom screens and top screens. Usually it's because they don't have the drawing comb, they don't have empty space for the queen to lay. They've just outgrown their home. Foragers are going to beard on the outside of the hive when temperatures get too hot or humid. You're going to see this in August. And they do this so they don't overheat the brood. They know if they stay in there, they're going to cook the brood. So you're going to find them hanging out on the porch. And that's normal, totally normal. That's not anything to do with swarming. The type of breed. So this is true. Some say Russians and Carnies are more prone to swarm. Okay, yeah, but that's not a bad thing. They tend to build up quicker in the spring. It's just that you have to keep up with them. So if you're not great at keeping, up and doing your weekly inspections, maybe those aren't the type of bees that you want. Maybe you want Italians. So warning signs. More drones are often reared. Fewer and fewer eggs are laid by the queen. You might see backfilling, and that's basically where brood should be. You might see a bunch of nectar. And that could also be an indication, though, that you're queenless. If you're not seeing a lot of brood and you're seeing nectar where brood should have been, you could be queenless. That's a classic sign, because they're just like, I'm just gonna stick it here because why not? There's no queen here anymore. So, but generally, if they're starting to backfill to get ready to swarm, you're gonna have a lot of bees in there. If you are queenless and they start putting nectar where the brood should be, you're probably not going to see as many bees that are in there, because several weeks have gone on by that point without her laying, and so you're going to see your population start to dwindle and dip at that point. Sudden or abundant production of queen cups or play cups, or charged queen cell cups. That's a real danger zone right there when you start to see charged queen cell cups. If you start to see play cups, sometimes, you know, different bees do that for different reasons. Italians, again, they're great wax producers, so sometimes I think they just like making them to scare us, or just they're hedging their bets. But you have to look at these play cups and see if that play cup has been charged with an egg, and then it's a queen cell at that point, and they're getting ready to do something. 9 times out of 10.
Quick question for the chat. Would you clarify the difference between abscond versus swarm?
Absconding is when they all leave the hive, all of them. It's like a ghost town. Swarming, so they make a new queen, she stays behind, and about 20% of your bees stay behind, roughly. But absconding, everybody leaves, everybody's gone.
Thank you.
So spring is typically the time when bees swarm more because there's more intense nectar flow and more brood buildup. They're more inclined in the spring because there's more chances for survival for the parent colony. They really don't want to leave the colony hanging. And so usually there's more food, you know, for the colony left behind. And the weather conditions are better. Bees can swarm at any time though, in late summer, beginning of fall, depending on the variables, weather, foraging, and hive strength. They can swarm all the way into October if the conditions are right. And it's usually in good weather and in an afternoon, but not always. It could be in the morning. It's generally when you leave to go to work or go to the grocery store and you can't go collect it, or then they go 20 feet up in a tree. It's always, yeah, they do something crazy. So swarm preparation actually begins 2 to 4 weeks before the first prime swarm issues or leaves. So they already know what they're going to do weeks ahead of time. Warning signs: flora is abundant. There's lots of pollen and nectar intake. So again, spring. Colony strength before and after nectar flow. So they were, you know, big going into this nectar flow. They're gonna bust, you know, once that strong nectar flow comes. Not a lot of open cells, and you see a lot of capped brood because there's just nowhere else for her to lay anymore. One frame of steel brood when they emerge as adult bees is going to cover roughly 3 frames. That's a lot of bees. So not only is this population about to explode, but the parent colony can recover its workers quickly after the swarm leaves. That's the theory. Doesn't always work out that way. So the swarm cells, there's usually at the bottom, but not always. They can be on the sides of the frame. They can be on the face of the frame. They can be on the top of the frame. Sometimes once they start going crazy into swarm mode, they just start putting queen cells everywhere. And then they can put, they like to hide them too. And they put them like in funky drone comb or messed up comb. They get real slick where they put them. And swarm cells will be many. And this ensures that at least one of these virgins is going to come out and emerge and hopefully come back home after she mates. When producing supersedure or emergency cells, only a few are made, because especially with an emergency cell, the queen is dead. So, you know, maybe you accidentally killed her, you know, on an inspection. So they only have an opportunity to make these queen cells from whatever eggs that were already there. And so that there might not be that many. Supersedure cells, like maybe the same way, you know, if she ran out of fertilized juice. I have seen bees never try to supersede a queen, a dud queen. And I think it's because of her pheromone, that her pheromone is strong and keeps fooling them. And so that's why you want to keep an eye on the brood production and the pattern, because it's like, why don't you get rid of her? Why don't you make, you know, a new queen? It's the pheromone. They still like the smell of her. Supersedure cells are generally the same age, while swarm cells are going to vary in age. Like every day, they're like making these new cells, and so they're going to be longer, you know, and they start them at different times. The first swarm queen cells that are made are given the best care and produce quality queens. So if you're into trying to make your own queens, these are the cells that you want to use for that. Backup cells are generally not as good or well cared for, because they're like, they've just lost their minds at that point and they're just making stuff. And they're just like, whatever, we're going to put queens everywhere. Those of medium length and heavily dimpled, marbled are usually good. Any that are smooth and long are usually poor. So this one right there, they've loved this. They've cared for it. They've doted over it. This right here, they're like, whatever. There's a queen in there. We gave her some royal jelly, whatever. So this is the one, the dimpled one is the one that if you want to pick a good queen, that would more than likely be the better queen there. So these are the play cups or queen cups, but I generally just call them play cups. They become queen cups to me once they put eggs in them. And they just little olive shape, but again, you have to look in there if you see them to see if there's any eggs in there. You can get rid of them if you want, but look inside of there first to see what's going on, and then double check that your queen is still there. Because if they've already swarmed or something like that, you might be messing up a way for them to make their own queen. So don't go crazy and start chopping these out. Look inside of them first. If they're empty, you can get rid of them if you want. I just ignore them after that. So it becomes a queen cup or a queen cell charged once it actually has an egg in it. And so that's what they're planning on doing, is making a new queen, whether it be for supersedure emergency reasons or swarm reasons. So this is, there's swarm cells down here on the bottom. So that's like your classic where the swarm cells are. Again, they can be on the face of the comb. This is Randy Oliver's picture, so I know he knows what he's talking about, but these are definitely swarm cells. But another indication is look at all that cat brood that's right there in all those bees. If this was a supersedure cell and she was running out of fertilized juice, or if it was emergency cell, you're not going to see the same population and amount of brood. Now this one's a little bit trickier. This is actually swarm cells. So they all do look like they're the same age. It's built on the face of the comb. There's not a lot of brood there, but the real indicator here is this is not drawn out right here. So this is a plastic frame that didn't get drawn out. They don't have enough room for the queen to lay on. So they're gonna try to leave and start over somewhere. When queen cells are made, scouting for new sites may begin at this time. So the scout bee goes out and returns and performs a dance similar to the waggle dance to indicate the location of a new home. Problem is, we got a couple scout bees going out and looking for homes, and some of them come back and tell, you know, different places, and so they all have to decide, you know, where they're going to go. About a week before swarming, workers are going to feed the queen less, and her egg laying may decrease, and her abdomen decreases in weight, but so she can fly with the swarm. Again, she doesn't want to swarm. She has no idea what's happening. She's very confused about all of this. She just wants to lay eggs. but it's the workers that are starting all of this, and they chase her, they bite her, they push her, and that forces her to keep moving and to thin out and become lean so she can fly, and also stop laying eggs. And they feed her less, so she's not producing as many eggs, and if she does produce any, they're probably going to come behind her and cannibalize them. Charge queen cells are capped at 8 days, and so at this point they can leave. They're like, you all are good, we're out of here. And that's the first cell. So the very first cell that they made, they can leave. Depending on the weather, colonies usually swarm shortly after the first queen cell's capped. Workers may tear down cells to delay swarming in bad weather, or they might lose the swarm impulse altogether. And especially if we go outside of a nectar flow, or if a dearth happens, they're like, never mind, we changed our mind, change of plans, we're not going to do it. So they could tear down these cells and then just change their plans. Workers will sometimes keep virgins trapped in their cells, and they can be heard piping at one another because they're trying to control when they're going to make the swarm, when it's going to happen. The field bees do less work and may congregate at the hive entrance and on the lower frames, and less flight activity at the entrance. They start getting pretty lazy at this point. Workers engorge with honey about 10 days prior to swarming. Supers start getting very crowded with bees, and the idle bees are generally filled with honey, and they may look like their abdomens are distended. That can be really hard to tell, these physical things here. Right before swarming, the workers are going to perform a word dance, and they go crazy. So I had in the observation hive here, it had issues, and I knew it was going to abscond. And I was in here, it was quiet, and all of a sudden I just heard this zzzz, like, oh my God, what is that? I was like, is that them? Is that observation? I was like, oh, they're leaving. They're getting ready to leave. And I pulled back the curtain, and I saw them going up and down. And so it was really neat seeing. So they were absconding, but it's the same action that they were doing, that they do to swarm, but they were just going up and down. They were going crazy. And that's to rally the troops, like, we're leaving, we're leaving. And the bees zigzag and whir their wings and shake, but they were loud. And so the prime swarm contains young workers and a few drones, and the swarm settles nearby, and they want to check to see if they got the queen. Again, the queen doesn't want to leave. She doesn't understand what's happening. Scout bees begin to search again for the suitable home. They want to make sure that what they saw earlier is still available. And then the swarm may remain in a temporary spot for a few hours or a few days. It's generally just a few hours. But if they can't make up their minds within 2 to 3 days, they need to set up shop wherever that swarm landed, because they got to unload that honey. They've been holding it in their guts for days. They got to do it. And of course, we know that if you see an open air, this is called an open air hive, they're not going to survive the winter here. So you would have to, rescue that and rehouse it. Hopefully you can do that, and it's not 20 feet up in a tree. But yeah, they couldn't make their minds up. The scout bees, maybe their home wasn't available anymore. They're like, oh crap, that was our house that we wanted to move in, and now it's not there anymore. Or maybe too many scouts had too many sites, and they're just like, we can't make up our minds, so we're just going to stay here. Afterwards, or after swarms, secondary or cast swarms are likely, and they might leave with the virgin queen. So that can be really problematic if you're trying to let them requeen themselves, because they can leave with the virgin that came out of there. And springtime is famous for that. I've even seen them leave with queens that people bought. So they've cut out, all of the queen cells, and then they introduce a bought queen, and then they swarm with the bought queen. That's how, yeah. And they knew it because it was, we marked it and all of that. And so they came back and told me that, and then they were able to get them, thank goodness. But they just get in this mode, and it can be very hard to break them of this. And the secondary swarms or smaller, because there's less population and all of that, generally happens 10 to 15 days later, and hives can literally swarm themselves to death until there's just nothing left. So you again, swarming good for the bees. That means that they were doing so well, but it can be not good for the bees if they just can't break this pattern. And secondary swarms can occur if they were not able to herd the old queen out in the prime swarm. So this happens a lot too. If the queen gives them the slip inside, she's hiding on, under wonky comb or something like that, then they thought they got her and they go out in a bush and they're like, oh no, she's not here. Then they'll go back in and they'll start the word dance process all over again and try to get her out. So swarm prevention, control, and management. Swarm prevention is the steps taken by the beekeeper to reduce chances of swarming before the signs are seen. So before you see queen cells, before you see backfilling, running out of space, these are actions that you take in advance. This is where you want to be. You want to be in swarm prevention. You don't want to be in swarm control mode, because then you're trying to play catch up, and it can be hard to break them of, again, this innate instinct to swarm. So swarm control is the action taken after the visible signs of the colony intending to swarm are seen. And swarm management, this is quoted by Randy Oliver, is the swarm management consists of somehow coaxing our colonies into storing honey beyond their needs rather than following their natural reproductive urges. So it can be very challenging to run honey production hives, want to get all this honey, and keep the girls from swarming too. It's a very thin line between swarming and running honey production hives. So before swarming occurs, you want to decide what your swarm management is going to be. Your objectives. Do you want bees or do you want honey? It's very hard to have both. Some colonies will give you both. But chances are, if they're giving you bees and they're giving you honey, they're going to want to swarm. So you don't want to lose both of them. But we'll talk about how to handle that, but decide what you want to do. Your decision is going to dictate your swarm control and prevention techniques, and there's a fine line between running strong hives or honey production hives and keeping them off the street. Swarm prevention, several methods can be time consuming and risky. The Demore method, checkerboarding, Snellgrove method, replacing brood frames with foundation or foundationless frames. Other methods use equipment such as slatted bottom boards, tearing off board inner covers, and clean excluders. So there's people come up with all kinds of different tricks and things to do stuff, and some of them are better than others. Some of them are more complicated. Some of them more time consuming. Some of them are just more riskier than others. And if you only have 2 colonies, you probably don't want to play around and choose a riskier method, because you've only got 2 colonies. If you've got more than 10, you can play around. You can afford to take some risk, and try these different things out. The easiest method for swarm prevention: open the brood nest. That is just simply removing a frame or 2 of brood and hopefully putting in drawn comb in its place. Because again, if they don't have the drawn comb, that's going to be a reason for them to swarm. So just by giving them foundation, that's like, thanks, I still don't have furniture here. But hopefully maybe they can draw it out. I mean, you can only do what you can do. If that's all you got, then that's all you can do. But you have to do something. You can't just not do anything. And so the easiest, best way is you remove some brood, frame or 2, and the removal of brood frames is going to decrease your population for a short period, gives the queen more space to lay in. Hopefully, if you have drawn comb, allows more room for bees. and just shocks them back into the regular routine. It's like, oh, okay, we've got these empty cells, we've got new babies to take care of. So excuse me, it's back to business. Strong hives with well-populated brood frames and good laying patterns should be watched more carefully for swarm cells, or considered for removing some brood frames. And so it really depends on the time of year, and there's really, again, nothing set in stone. But if we're getting ready to go into a major nectar flow, and you have them laying in the top and bottom boxes, you're approaching Swarmville here. So you just want to be more proactive. So in other words, don't take a vacation in April or May. Don't, just push that off, or get somebody else to look at your hive for you. Many variables depend on hive buildup, such as mites, forage capabilities, weather, etc. So we all these planets have to align all the time for all these things to happen. So obviously this hive is going to swarm. I mean, look at all that brood, look at all the bees, so that definitely needs to be thinned out a little bit. This one too, this is one of my most favorite hives. You can see that I have my queen excluder and supers one right here. That's a lot of bees. So, you go in there, you thin it out a little bit. It's better to remove too much brood than not enough. Brood frames can be put back later if you discovered that you've taken too much. Nurse bees and brood frames are just like musical chairs. You can just move them back and forth as long as you're not having any disease issues. If there are no disease issues, keep moving them back and forth. You can make a nuke or split with the frames that you've removed, but my first go-to again is always helping out a weaker colony first. Not everybody is always going to be on the same level. And so you can help boost them out and give them more workforce by giving them some of that brood. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't believe in coddling weak bees. They think that's poor genetics. I don't agree with that, because there's so many problems that the bees have, and there's so many problems that we don't know they have, not unless you're a scientist with a microscope and you're putting all this, all these bees, under microscopes and whatnot. Do you actually know what's going on with the bees? So I feel that, throughout the season, I've given them the best chances, the best opportunities, by giving them, help. And if they don't make it, then we did the best that we could do at that point. So don't remove, never, ever, 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 ever remove nurse bees from brood frames. You're going to see people tell you to do that. And I get it. It's scary, because you don't want to pull the queen from that colony. But those nurse bees need to stay with that brood to take care of that brood, especially if you're moving those bees into a weak colony. That has an age imbalance of nurse bees, because they can't take care of that brood. If you just move that into a colony that's mostly foragers, they can't take care of those bees. They're probably going to cannibalize them or just not take care of them. So those nurse bees need to go along with that brood. They're caregivers for that brood. You wouldn't leave babies without caregivers, so don't leave bees without their caregivers. Replace brood with empty drawn comb, and if you got it, use good comb with not a lot of drone cells, because of varroa mite. We don't want to encourage the queen to lay drones any more than she's going to. During strong nectar flows, you should be inspecting your hives every 7 days for swarm behavior and signs, and you can ease up off of it outside of nectar flows, 7 to 10 days. Methods that don't work: queen clipping, and that's brutal too. Workers might kill the queen trying to get her to fly with the swarm. They don't understand why she can't fly. They don't understand that, you know, she's got her wing clipped. So most of the time they're going to herd her onto the ground and just abandon her. Because again, they don't get it. And so they're just like, okay, we tried to move you, but we got to, you know, move on here. And so most of the time they'll just swarm with the virgin queen. So a queen that's been clipped might only delay the swarming until, you know, any of those virgins come out, and then they're going to leave with her. Adding more boxes, adding additional brood boxes might temporarily help with swarm prevention, but it's only going to delay the inevitable. It's the brood nests that, you know, you have to attend to and free up. Adding more boxes, you know, she's not up in there. A lot of times queens can just act like broken records too, just in the brood nest. I've seen that happen. So rotating your boxes in the spring can help, but you do want to be careful and mindful of nighttime temps, because you don't want to split up the brood nest. And so, because then that's going to result into chill brood. I generally just let her do what she does, but there are some times where, you know, you get those queens, it's like, why aren't you moving down into this other box? And then you switch it. But if you just add more boxes, you know, yes, they like to work upwards, but that doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. And that can invite wax moths up in there. If you're having a small hive beetle problem, then they're all going to go up in there. But you do want to add 2 supers, you know, if we're in intense nectar flow, obviously, because you want to try to get some honey. No more methods that don't work, excluders and swarm guards. Workers might kill the queen trying to get her to fly. She can't get out of this queen excluder because, you know, well, she might be able to because she's spin down and fly, but there's a possibility that she might not be able to too. But just the process of getting her out and through that queen excluder, it could kill her. And virgin queens small enough can slip through the excluder, and so, you know, that's going to be an issue. But they're still going to swarm. Virgins who escaped and return mated might not be able to fly back in, and drones can't fly through them either. So your boys aren't coming back home here or getting out. If you find charged or capped queen cells, before removing the frames and cutting styles, you want to be sure they haven't already swarmed and the original queen is still present, because you could be screwing up their, you know, way of making a new queen. And if that's what you want to do, because it does take more time from that point, it's going to take about another about 3 weeks for her. No, wait a minute. She's already emerged, so it'll be another week. Well, she has to become sexually mature. So about another 2 weeks after that, after she's emerged, she has to become sexually mature and her exoskeleton has to harden. Then she goes on her mating flight and hopefully comes back and it's not bird food or on somebody's windshield. But if you wanted to let them make their own queen, you don't want to ruin their possibilities of being able to do that. So don't go crazy with cutting out queen cells. Remove the brood frames and replace with drawn comb. So again, you know, robbing from the rich, giving to the poor, or starting with a nuke, or start a nuke. Cutting off the queen cells and replacing it doesn't work. They are already on their path to swarm. They're already in that mode, especially if the queen cells are capped. Pheromones are still present, and you're not alleviating the original problem, which is the congestion in the brood nest. So you need preferably drawing comb in there, empty drawing comb. You can place frames with cells in a nuclear split and let it clean themselves. If that's a walk away split right there. That's a great way to increase your colonies. It's very easy to do, and it's a great thing to play around with and fun. So if you find charged or cut queen cells, cut the cells off and give it a new queen, if that's what you want to do. If you don't want to wait around, you know, because remember, timing is everything. We got to wait for her to come out, and you put it in a nuclear split. But really, by that point, if you're making a nuclear split, just let them make their own queen. Don't buy a new one. If it's in the spring, you know, if we're under the gun in the clock, in August or July, you might not have as much time. So you might want to consider your options there. Or cut the cells off and put it in a weaker colony. You could leave the queen cells on them and not cut them off, and they'll just tear them down because they're like, we're not trying to swarm. What's this queen doing here? And they'll just kill it. Or you can cut it off, whatever makes you feel better. Again, do not remove the nurse bees whatsoever. Anytime you do brood manipulation, never remove the nurse bees. If the old queen is still present, you can create an artificial swarm by moving her into a new hive. And a lot of times this is a good way to break them of that. And it's also another way of increasing your colonies too. They think they already swarmed. So you just move those, that new queen out into a, new colony, and they're like, oh, yep, we swarmed. Yay. And hopefully they'll stop, making queen cells. If queen cells are missed, the hive can still swarm. And again, they get very, very sneaky where they put these queen cells. So final notes, swarming does provide brood breaks, which are good varroa control. However, the parent colony is weak and has a lot of cap brood and a lot of drone brood. So that also means there's probably a lot of varroa that are getting ready to emerge as well. Most are young workers living in the swarm and can be damaging in the parent colony. And now we've created an age imbalance, and that's always an issue. Again, our factory and our assembly line are, are different ages of our bees that have these different duties that they need to do. And if we're lacking in an age group, the colony is going to start suffering. An age imbalance has been created, and it's going to take time for it to recover. And responsible beekeepers just shouldn't let their hive swarm, especially if you live in town or anything like that, because people really freak out when they see swarms. And we know, we can tell them all day long that they're nice and they don't have a home to protect. Their bellies are full of honey, but the general public just really freaks out. So, and really it's just your money flying away that you might not be able to recoup. Now, if you're collecting somebody else's swarm, that's a different story. That's freebies right there. And that's the law of the land, that whoever collects the swarm, it's their bees, as long as you're not going on their property to do it. But yeah. So I don't know what time. This is the final slide for that. Do you all want me to keep going into honey production?
Well, we usually book for about an hour, and we are about an hour and 20 minutes in. I think, if anything, what I'd like to do is see if any of the members have any questions for you that they didn't ask in the chat.
Excellent. All right.
Got a pretty good audience tonight. Any questions at all? Needless to say, Jen covered a lot of territory. There is a question in the chat. What about swarm traps?
Again, it's great for other people's bees to get other people's bees, but you don't want to bank on collecting your own bees that way. That's not a very proactive way of swarm management, and it's not prevention at all. And not really control, because they might not go in that trap. Yeah, there's things that you can do with swarm lures and putting wax in there, but it's still no guarantee that they're going to go into it. But I do highly recommend that if you live near an orchard, put up swarm traps, because a lot of times the pollinators, they just drop off their bees there for 2 weeks, and they may or may not be inspecting them. But definitely, they're probably really, big colonies that could swarm. And so you might get a lot of free bees that way.
Cool. No, really good point about it if you live near an orchard. Another question in the chat. Do you see much robbing in January and February? If so, do you put screens, do you put on robbing screens?
The potential is always there. If the weather's good enough for them to fly, then yes, they can. And so, yeah, you can put them on. But it just, generally January is and February or blizzard months, and we don't usually experience a lot of warm days, but it definitely, any potential there, if it's warm, they're going to do that because they're scavengers, and especially during these times of dearth, they go frenzy mode.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Let's see, any other questions from any of the members? You can either come off mute or ask in the chat, up to you.
Like I said, I'm available anytime. If anybody has any questions later or gets into their hives, anytime soon, and there's issues, questions, I'm available. And I'm also available to come back and give the honey and comb production presentation another time.
Jen, it's always a pleasure to have you, so we most certainly would welcome the opportunity to have you back again. I
Always
just
fun.
Well, thank you. And again, you covered a tremendous amount of territory, much of it so timely. It's hard to believe it's here, it's upon
It's
us.
coming. Yeah, time flies.
Let me see. One question in the chat. Is it a good practice to remove wax from honey super after honey extraction?
Remove the wax from where? From the super? I'm not quite following.
I think that was from, is that L? Do you want to come offline and ask the question? Or come off mute and ask the question? Not,
I mean, well, extractions, I mean, you have to, like cap it to extract. Are you talking about putting the supers back on after extraction?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Hi,
So the question is, after I do my honey harvest, and I'm using, obviously I'm using plastic frames and the supers. Is it a good practice to actually remove the wax and clean the frames, or leave
No.
that wax there for the next year?
Oh yeah, no, leave it. Yeah.
Leave it.
Yeah.
Okay.
For the plastic, which I won't go into, love or hate that issue, it's the big debate. I don't prefer it, but it's still considered drawn comb, so you want to leave it on there. And once again, it's going to be the same replacement schedule, generally 2 to 3 years, and you'll know generally once that wax starts looking old and dark, it's probably time to retire that wax. But for honey supers, it's a little bit different. As long as there's no brood that's ever laid in it, that lasts much longer than brood comb. And that's another reason why I like using queen excluders. And also, if no brood was ever laid in it, wax moths generally are not attracted to super comb, as long as brood's not in there, or a lot of pollen wasn't put in there, because they're after the protein that, from pollen, or from the skins that molting, that might be little bits left over that the nurse bees didn't clean up as well. But generally, if you're using a queen excluder and brood's never been laid in there, you don't have to worry, and you can use it much longer. But your wax is a sponge. It is a biomarker, an indicator, and so everything from the environment is getting sucked in, on the bees there. And so, and also treatments, get retained in your wax as well. But if you're not treating, while you have your honey supers on, which I don't recommend doing. I know that they say that they're safe, like Formic. I can't believe it's safe, but okay. And oxalic acid, even oxalic acid, when I'm vaporizing, I'll take my honey supers off. Oxalic acid, let it marinate, for a couple minutes, and it crystallizes, and then, put my honey supers back on. I just like the thought of not having any type of treatments in the honey there, but you can absolutely reuse that comb. So, and definitely do that. You put them right back on the hive. The bees will clean them up and probably put more honey in, depending on the blooms that are coming along.
Thank you so much. I do use an excluder, and I do treat with no supers on, so that makes sense. Again, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jen. Anyone else? Any last questions of Jen? I somehow suspect this won't be the last time we see Jen, but
Yeah, that's fine.
okay. I think we're in good shape. Jen, thank you again so much for a fantastic presentation.
No problem.
Like I said, it's always great to
There
see you, and really appreciate your time, and appreciate the good turnout tonight and everyone's question.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Okay, and unless there are any final questions, and yeah, I can see in the chat, Jen, we've got thank yous, and this was great. Thank you. Lots of thank yous coming through. So always great to have you. I will go ahead and conclude the recording, and let's see if I can